I remember the morning clearly because the coffee maker had broken the night before, and I'd driven to the Tim Hortons on Riverside before the sun was fully up. I sat in the parking lot with a double-double going cold in my hand, looking at nothing in particular, thinking about how quiet the house had been since my father passed. 63 years old, and I still hadn't learned how to sit in silence without it feeling like something was wrong. My name is Gerald Whitmore. I spent 31 years as a site supervisor for a mid-sized construction company out of London, Ontario. I retired at 61, 2 years before my father died. The timing was both lucky and terrible lucky, because I was home when he needed me most. Terrible because losing him was the first thing I had to face without a work schedule to hide behind. My father's name was Douglas. He built the house himself in 1971 on a half-acre lot outside of Woodstock. 3 bedrooms, a finished basement, a detached garage he was prouder of than anything else on the property. He told me once that a man who builds something with his hands understands it differently than a man who just buys it. I was 12 when he said that. I didn't understand it then. I understand it completely now. When he died, he left the house to me. My younger brother, Warren, got the savings account, the truck, and the tools in the garage. My father had spoken to both of us about this arrangement 2 years before he passed, when he was still sharp enough to make sure we understood his reasoning. He told Warren that the house should stay with the eldest, that it had been in the family since before Warren was born, and that he trusted me to maintain it. Warren nodded. He said he understood. He hugged our father and said it was fair. I believed him. Warren was 58 at the time of our father's death. He had been living in a rented apartment in Brantford for 11 years, since his divorce. He worked irregularly, some seasonal landscaping, some handyman contracts, and I knew his finances were not stable, but I never pushed into that. A man has his pride. I respected his. The estate was settled without a lawyer's fight, which I was grateful for. The will was clear. My father's solicitor, a woman named Patricia Okafor out of Woodstock, handled everything properly. I received the deed. I signed the paperwork. Warren received his portion, and we shook hands outside Patricia's office on a Tuesday afternoon in March, 2 years ago this spring. I moved into the house 6 weeks after the funeral. I needed that time. I painted 2 of the bedrooms, replaced the water heater, and had the roof inspected. I wanted to honor what my father had built by caring for it properly. That felt important to me. The first month was peaceful. I was still grieving, but there was something comforting about being in those rooms. The smell of the place, the way the afternoon light came through the kitchen window, the sound of the gravel driveway under tires, all of it felt like my father was still nearby somehow. Not in a frightening way. In the way that love leaves something of itself in a place. Warren called me in late April, about 5 weeks after I'd moved in. He said he was struggling. His landlord had raised the rent, and he was 2 months behind. He asked if he could stay with me temporarily, just until he got back on his feet. He said 3 months at the most. I said yes. Of course, I said yes. He was my brother. He arrived on a Saturday with 2 truckloads of belongings, and his girlfriend, a woman named Cheryl, who I had only met twice before at family gatherings. She was friendly enough. She brought a casserole the first night and seemed genuinely grateful. I gave them the larger of the 2 spare bedrooms and cleared space in the basement for their extra things. 3 months passed. Warren found a few small jobs, but nothing steady. I didn't push. I covered groceries without mentioning it. I kept the heat on through the spring cold snaps without splitting the bill. I told myself this was what family did. Then something happened that I did not expect. It was a Wednesday evening in early June. I had been out to a friend's place for dinner, my old foreman, a man named Dave Sutherland, who lived about 20 minutes away. I came home around 9:30 to find Warren and Cheryl sitting at the kitchen table with a man I had never seen before. He was perhaps 50, heavy-set, with a leather folder open in front of him. They stopped talking the moment I walked through the door. Warren introduced him as a colleague. The man gathered his papers quickly and left before I could ask any questions. Cheryl said they were just discussing some business ideas. Neither of them met my eyes when they said it. I went to bed uneasy. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself I had no reason to distrust my brother. But the feeling sat in my chest all night like something I couldn't name. The next morning I drove to Tim Hortons again. Habits are a comfort when you don't know what else to do. I sat in the parking lot and I called Dave and told him what I'd seen. Dave listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said quietly, "Gerald, have you changed the locks since you moved in?" I hadn't thought about it. My father's locks. My father's keys. How many copies existed? I didn't know. I didn't change the locks that day. But I started paying attention. Over the following 2 weeks, I noticed small things. A drawer in my father's old desk in the basement had been gone through. I could tell because I keep things in a particular order and that order had been disturbed. A folder where I kept copies of household documents, insurance papers. The deed had been moved from where I always placed it. Not missing, just moved. As though someone had looked through it and replaced it carefully, but not carefully enough. I said nothing. I watched. Then on a Thursday morning in late June, I received a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. Something made me pick up. The voice on the other end was a woman's. She introduced herself as Patricia Okafor, my father's solicitor. She apologized for calling unexpectedly. She said she needed to speak with me about something that had come to her attention, and that she preferred not to discuss it over the phone. She asked if I could come to her office the following morning. She said to please come alone. I didn't sleep that night. I was at her office at 9 the next morning. Patricia was a careful, methodical woman in her early 60s, the kind of professional who chooses every word deliberately. She offered me tea. I accepted without tasting it. She sat across from me and folded her hands and said, "Gerald, I've received a document in the last week that concerns your father's estate. I want you to see it before I take any further steps." She slid a paper across the desk. It was formatted to look like an addendum to my father's will. It claimed that my father had changed his mind in the final months of his life and wished to divide the property equally between me and Warren, with a buyout provision that would require me to either pay Warren half the assessed value of the house or sell and split the proceeds. My father's signature was at the bottom. I looked at that signature for a long time. Patricia watched me. Then she said, carefully, "This document was couriered to my office from a legal firm in Hamilton. I was not involved in its preparation. Your father never contacted me about any amendment to his will. That alone raised my concern." She paused. "But more than that, I had a home visit with your father approximately 4 months before his death, to review the existing will. He was unambiguous. He confirmed his wishes as written. He expressed no desire to alter the distribution of the property." She paused again. "He was also, at that stage, showing significant cognitive decline. He would not have been legally capable of executing a valid amendment." I heard what she was saying. I understood every word. But I sat there for a moment and felt something I can only describe as the floor moving. "Someone forged this," I said. Patricia did not confirm or deny. She said, "I think this document requires careful scrutiny before anyone acts on it. I wanted you to be aware, and I wanted to suggest that you retain legal counsel." I drove home from Woodstock with my hands steady on the wheel and my mind very, very quiet. That is what I do when something serious happens. I go quiet. I went quiet the day my father's doctor told us it was terminal. I went quiet the day the will was read. I went quiet now. Warren and Cheryl were both home when I arrived. I said hello and went upstairs. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at the wall, and I thought carefully about what I knew and what I did not know, and what I needed to find out. I did not say anything to Warren. Not yet. I retained a solicitor in London that same afternoon, a man named Andrew Firth, who had been recommended to me years ago, and whom I had never needed until now. I described the situation. He told me not to confront anyone, not to change my behavior in any way that might alert whoever was behind the document, and to let him make inquiries. He also suggested, gently, that if I had any concerns about the security of physical documents in the house, I should secure them without drawing attention to it. That night, while Warren and Cheryl were watching television in the living room, I went down to the basement and removed every important document I could find: the deed, insurance papers, my father's original will, my own identification files, and drove them to a safety deposit box I opened the following morning. The folder went back in the drawer, empty, positioned exactly as it had been. I said nothing. I waited. Andrew Firth moved quickly and quietly. Within 10 days, he had contacted the Hamilton legal firm, whose letterhead was on the false addendum. The firm had no record of the document. The lawyer whose name appeared on it confirmed by email that he had not prepared any such amendment and had never acted for my father. Andrew reported this to me over the phone in the measured tone of a man who has seen this before and wanted me to understand the full gravity without causing panic. He said we had clear grounds to pursue a fraud investigation. He said I should not be alone in the house with Warren. I called Dave Sutherland that evening. Dave was at my door by 7, with a thermos of coffee and no questions. I told him everything. He listened. He said, "What do you need?" I said I needed a few more days. Andrew had also done something I had not expected. He had contacted Patricia Okafor to verify the timeline of events, and Patricia, methodical as always, had pulled her client files. She told Andrew that during her final meeting with my father, he had mentioned his smart home system. My father, despite being in his late 80s, had a modest smart home setup installed by a technician. His home care agency arranged motion sensors, a video doorbell, and a small indoor camera in the living room that he used to check in with the monitoring service. He'd asked Patricia if it was safe to have a camera inside, and she told him that as long as he was comfortable with it, it was his choice. That system had been registered to my father's email address. When my father died, I had disconnected the doorbell camera. I had not known about the indoor camera. I had not known his email account was still active, forwarding to a backup address he'd set up years ago with the help of a grandchild. Andrew explained this to me slowly. The indoor camera, a small device mounted on a shelf in the living room, had continued recording motion events to cloud storage because no one had canceled the subscription. The monitoring company had flagged the account as inactive for billing, but the footage was still saved. I drove to Brantford with Andrew 2 days later to meet with the monitoring company's regional contact in person. We signed the necessary consent forms as executor of my father's estate. They gave us access. We sat in their small conference room and watched the footage on a laptop. The relevant clips were from a Tuesday afternoon in early May, a day I had been in London, visiting Dave and his wife. Warren and Cheryl were in the living room. The man I had seen at the kitchen table, the heavy-set man with the leather folder, was there again. I watched him spread papers on the coffee table. I watched Warren lean over them. I watched Cheryl hand Warren a pen. I watched Warren sign something, and then the man collected everything into the folder. They were in my father's living room, using my father's furniture, in my father's house, and Warren signed something that was meant to take that house from me. I did not make a sound. Andrew sat beside me and said nothing. We watched the footage twice. Then he closed the laptop and said, very quietly, "We have everything we need." I want to tell you what I felt in that moment, because I think it matters. I did not feel rage. I know people expect rage in a story like this. I felt something closer to grief, not for myself, but for the brother I had believed I knew, for the handshake outside Patricia's office, for the casserole Cheryl brought the first night, for every Sunday dinner we had ever shared at our parents' table. But grief is not the same as forgiveness. And forgiveness, if it comes, is not the same as consequence. Andrew moved forward with the fraud report to the Ontario Provincial Police. The detective assigned to the file was professional and thorough. She interviewed Warren and Cheryl separately. The heavy-set man from the video, a notary whose license had been suspended the previous year for unrelated misconduct, was identified through Andrew's contacts and cooperated with investigators when he understood the weight of the evidence. I was not in the room for any of that. Andrew handled everything. I stayed in my father's house and did not alter my routine and said nothing to Warren beyond the ordinary courtesies of people sharing a roof. Warren and Cheryl moved out on a Thursday in mid-August. I did not ask them to leave. Warren came to me the evening before and told me he needed to find other arrangements. He couldn't look at me. Cheryl did not come downstairs at all. Warren was gone by noon the next day. He left his key on the kitchen counter. I changed the locks that afternoon. Andrew filed the formal legal response to the fraudulent addendum. The document was nullified. The Hamilton firm issued a written statement confirming they had no involvement and had notified the Law Society of Ontario. The OPP's investigation resulted in charges being laid against the notary for document fraud. The matter of Warren's direct involvement remained under review at the time I am writing this, a process that moves slowly, as these things do. The house is mine. It was always mine. But that is almost secondary now. What I think about most, in the mornings when I drive to Tim Hortons and sit in that parking lot, is my father's hands building the garage, the way he measured twice and cut once, the way he checked his work before he moved on. He taught me that. He taught me that patience is not passivity, that waiting for the right moment is not the same as doing nothing. I think about what it means to protect something you love, not just legally, not just financially, but to protect its meaning, what it stands for, who built it, who it was meant to carry forward. My father knew what he was doing when he wrote that will. He knew his sons. He knew which one had spent 30 years showing up. He made his decision with clear eyes and a clear mind, and he trusted me to honor it. That trust is not something anyone can sign away with a borrowed pen in someone else's living room. The days are quieter now than they were in those weeks. I've repainted the garage door the same color my father used, a particular shade of green he chose in 1983 and never changed. I found the original paint chip in a drawer in the basement, still in the small envelope he'd labeled in his handwriting. Garage, exterior, good color. It is a good color. I have spoken to a few people since this happened who asked me what I would say to someone in a similar situation. I always give the same answer. Document everything. Trust the institutions built to protect you, and do not confuse loyalty to a person with tolerance of what they do. Those are different things. Warren is my brother. That does not change. But what he attempted to do is also real, and pretending otherwise would have cost me everything my father worked for. If someone in your life is pressuring you around property, inheritance, or shared assets, especially in the period following a parent's death, when everything is raw and people are not at their clearest, please speak to a solicitor, not because you should assume the worst of people, but because the law exists for exactly these moments. Patricia Okafor followed her professional obligations. Andrew Firth did his job thoroughly. The monitoring company's records preserved the truth. None of that required me to be certain in advance. It only required me to pay attention and to ask for help when I needed it. My father built this house in 1971. He built it to last. He built it for family. I intend to keep it that way, but on my own terms now. As he intended, there is a version of grief that turns into gratitude, if you let it. I am not there yet, fully, but I am building toward it, the same way my father built everything carefully, patiently, with attention to what will last. That is enough for now.